That weekend, I gave away the only thing I swore I didn't have. Time. Not money, not food, time. I spent my only weekend transcribing a stranger's war letters. And 20 years later, her archive reunited families I had never met. Listen closely. Because sometimes the smallest ink smudge carries a voice across decades and finds the person who needs it most. My name is Lara Quinn. I'm the kind of person who keeps a to-do list taped to another to-do list. And still, I never finish things. That's my flaw. I start, I stall, I promise, I postpone. Endings scare me. Goodbyes scare me more. So I fix what I can in the middle. Quiet tasks behind the curtain where no one sees me leave. A rainy Friday night, Boston. A used bookshop that smells like lost summers. I ducked inside to avoid the storm. The bell above the door coughed out a weary chime. On the back table, under a flickering lamp, a shoebox tied with a frayed red ribbon. A note lay on top. To be read, to be kept, to be remembered. Inside were letters, thin, brittle, edges furred by years. They were written by someone named Mireille Vauclin, a wartime nurse who'd learned to fold grief like laundry and still stand up in the morning. There were letters she wrote, and letters written to her. Names I didn't know. Names the world had let go. The shopkeeper, an old man with ink on his fingers, said, "They came with a donation. Nobody knows the family. I'm closing Sunday. They'll go in the bin." The bin. I don't know why that word stabbed me. But it did. I asked if I could take them home. Just for the weekend. I said I'd transcribe them. Every word, every water stain, every margin note. He blinked, surprised. All of them? There are hundreds. I heard my own voice say, yes. And in that, yes. I felt the cold breath of a familiar fear. What if I don't finish? What if I fail this woman I've never met? I paid nothing. I gave no coin, no bread. I gave the only thing I owned and barely had. My last free weekend. Saturday dawned pale and undecided. I drew the curtains. I boiled tea until the kettle learned my name. I opened the first envelope. To M. If the trains run, we carry morphine and oranges. I hide the orange peels in my pocket so the boys can smell something like July. I typed until my fingers wobbled, dizzy from the ghosts of citrus and smoke. The letters sang with small, stubborn details. The weight of a tin spoon, a scuffed hairpin shaped like a leaf passed from nurse to nurse. The frayed red ribbon that kept the bundle from falling apart. Every time I touched that ribbon, a powder of red dust clung to my skin, as if the decade refused to let go. There were names repeated like prayers. Jonas Mercer, a radio operator who sent music over ruined rooftops. Eveline Cho, a baker's daughter who hid recipes in the lining of her coat. Captain Theo Riston, who wrote in pencil because ink froze. Mireille wrote to them, of them, for them. Sometimes she drew a small sparrow in the corner, a quick sketch like a promise. If you fall, I will carry your name. I transcribed for hours. My eyes burned. In one letter, Mireille confessed she'd stolen a metronome from the hospital piano to keep her heartbeat steady during shelling. She kept it in her apron pocket. When fear galloped in her chest, she'd wind it. Listen to the steady click. Click, click, click. I wrote it all down. Because rhythm is a kind of courage. By noon, I had become her witness. But obstacles gathered like storm birds. A call from my boss. Monday's deadline moved up to Sunday. Can you send the brief? I glanced at the stacked envelopes. Felt the old panic. The Lara who doesn't finish. Rise like cold water. This was the cost, wasn't it? If I chose the letters, my job might crack. If I chose the job, the letters would vanish into the bin. I made tea. I made a decision. I sent my boss a rough draft. Risky, imperfect, and kept typing. Sacrifice doesn't always look brave. Sometimes it looks like choosing the right regret. Night arrived with its slow silver. The letters grew darker, the ink half erased. Now the handwriting changed. Jonas's long-legged scrawl, Eveline's careful script, Theo's engineer's print. Each carried a tiny object described with love. A chipped blue cup that warmed numb hands. A scar on Jonas's thumb from a soldering iron. A song Mireille hummed that sounded like home. I realized the letters were not just stories. They were maps. I taped sticky notes on my wall. Vines of names and arrows. Mireille, Jonas, Eveline, Theo. Places. Dates. A radio station that broadcast lullabies after curfew. A bakery ruined on a Wednesday and rebuilt on a Thursday with flour begged from 3 grandmothers. A wedding that never happened. A promise that did. Around 3 a.m., I met the enemy. Doubt. The words began to swim. My spine complained. The red ribbon, every time I untied and retied it, felt thinner, more fragile, like it might give up before I did. And then a letter that stopped me. It was the only one sealed with wax. The seal had cracked long ago, pressed with a sparrow mid-flight. If the war forgets us, make me a small favor. Write our names on something that will not burn. I copied the line, hands trembling. All at once, this work was not a favor. It was a debt. Sunday afternoon, the storm returned. I hurried back to the bookshop with my laptop and a thumb drive. I showed the shopkeeper, the man with ink-black fingers, what I'd done. Hundreds of pages. Searchable. Dates cross-referenced. He stared at the screen, and his eyes softened into something like pride. We uploaded the files to a public archive portal he hardly knew how to use. I added tags. I added translations. I added the little things that matter. Sparrow, metronome, red ribbon. So the search might catch what memory lost. Then I did something I hated. I said goodbye. I left the shoebox with him, heart pounding. As the bell coughed and the door closed, I wondered if it would matter to anyone. If Mireille's name would ever be typed by anyone but me. I went home. I slept. I woke Monday to a scolding email from my boss. I survived. Life, messy, ordinary, swept forward. The archive lived quietly in a corner of the internet, like a candle behind thick glass. Years blew past like pages in a gust. New job. A houseplant I kept alive. A father I finally called, too late to fix everything, early enough to say his name out loud. And sometimes, late at night, I'd open the archive and read a letter like a prayer. I never knew if any of it helped. Until the first message arrived. 20 years after that weekend, October 18th, 2025. My inbox rang with a note from a woman named Karis Lind. Are you the Lara who transcribed the Vauclain letters? My grandmother tucked a recipe for honey bread into the lining of her coat during the war. We lost the original. But in your archive, there's a letter from a woman named Eveline describing that recipe. The notes in the margin match my grandmother's handwriting. We thought we'd lost our story. Because of you, we baked her bread yesterday. I stared at the screen until the words went soft. Then more messages came, like slow rain turning to steady weather. A man in Ohio who'd been named after Jonas Mercer. He'd never known why. His mother had cried when she read Jonas's letter about a radio that survived a bomb because it was tucked in a flour sack during a raid. A teacher in Marseille whose students traced the route of the sparrow sketches and mapped them to shelters. A son who'd never met his father's father, Captain Theo Riston. The pencil letters taught him how to recognize the way Riston wrote the letter R, like he was building a bridge out of it. But the message that became the hinge, the one that turned the story from a file into a reunion, was from Annelle Grace, a nurse in her 60s. Her words careful, like steps over ice. Lara, my aunt was Mireille Vauclain. We knew she wrote. We didn't know who carried her name forward. I have something of hers you should see. We planned to meet in a community hall with windows like open eyes. People came, descendants of people whose names had been folded into those letters. They brought objects as if to an altar. The chipped blue cup, a radio dial polished by worry, a small beat-up metronome still ticking if you coaxed it. Annelle arrived last, holding a box wrapped in red ribbon, faded the same impossible shade. I swear it was the ribbon. Or its sister. We laid the items on a long table. I read aloud, slow so the past wouldn't trip, parts of Mireille's letters. We listened to the metronome. Click, click, click. And someone started humming the hospital song Mireille had written about. The room filled with a thin, steady peace, as if the air remembered how to be kind. Then, the small knot we hadn't expected. A young man stood by the door, hesitant. He introduced himself as Noah Riston. He had come hoping to prove a connection to Captain Theo, but the papers he brought were wrong. The surname had changed when a branch of the family fled, an accent added in the wrong place, a date transposed. The family tree didn't line up. I saw it in his face. The sink of hope. The quick defense. It's fine, he said too fast. I must be mistaken. I wanted to fix it. To hand him an answer that would click into place like a puzzle piece. But truth doesn't always arrive on the hour. We sat down together, spread the letters like constellations. And there, in the margin of a page written in pencil so faint it barely existed. Theo had sketched a bridge beside his signature and added a tiny note. Noah, if I ever build this, I'll name it after you. We traced the graphite with a soft light. The angle of the R, the habit of crossing the T low, exactly like Noah's birth certificate inked 50 years later by his grandmother, Theo's daughter. The room went quiet. Then, like a held breath finally released, Noah leaned against the table, one hand on the metronome, another on the red ribbon box, and closed his eyes. Not everyone finds their proof. But that afternoon he did. Anel opened the ribboned box and took out a small packet. Letters we had never seen. They were tied with a second, thinner ribbon. On top lay a note in Mireille's steady hand. For the ones who will come. If the war forgets us, remember this. We were more than our fear. We were each other's sparrows. People moved closer. Nobody moralized. Nobody preached. We passed each letter to new hands like bread. When they reached me, I saw the smudge of red dust on my fingers. The same tint that had stained me that first weekend. I thought about endings. How I'd feared them for so long. And yet, this ending did not close the door. It opened a window. Someone tied the frayed red ribbon back around the box. We stood there, not speaking. The metronome clicked softly, like a heart-making room. Outside, the evening drew its first lamps across the street. A sparrow, unremarkable and holy, landed on the sill. No one said a lesson out loud. We didn't need to. We watched the bird tilt its head, and in the hush between ticks, we let the past and the present sit together. The ribbon holding, the names held. A chorus of small, stubborn details that had finally found their home. Click, click, click.